A big focus of my research is trying to understand why the geographic patterning that we see in these two maps, a life expectancy map and a poverty rate map in the US, why the geographic patterning in these two maps is so similar. And we know that a big component of the explanation is that being poor is a prior common cause of both living in a poor neighborhood and of poor health. And we also have hundreds of papers coming out every single year suggesting that poor neighborhoods are bad for our health. So there's a causal relationship between neighborhood context and health. But a phenomenon that I'm interested in that has hardly been studied before is the possibility that poor health actually limits locational attainment for people. And if this relationship is causal, this matters because it means that poor health is not just a consequence of economic and racial ethnic segregation and neighborhood deprivation, but it's potentially a mechanism that reinforces these problems that we're trying to solve at DUSP. So is there empirical support for the idea that poor health limits your opportunities when it comes to neighborhoods? Over the past 3 years, I've looked at this in a number of contexts and populations, and with the exception of a positive but sort of weak and murky finding, all of my work suggests that yes, poor health is predictive of subsequent residence in higher poverty areas. But the problem with these studies is that these all have used best practices to kind of try to estimate causal effects from observational data. So I'm going to quickly tell you about a fifth paper that just came out last year on this topic that tries to do better in terms of saying, is there actually, what can we say about the causal effects of health on neighborhood outcomes? So the gold standard in science when we want to figure out does a treatment causally affect an outcome is that we experimentally manipulate the treatment across groups and we see, do the two groups have different outcomes? And the challenge here is that I'm trying to understand if health status as a treatment has a causal effect on neighborhood outcomes. So we have to experimentally manipulate health status, which seems kind of hard until you think that we do this all the time in medical studies in the form of randomized control trials. So some colleagues and I dug up old data on a really important early diabetes trial from the 1970s that was run across England that showed that people with diabetes who were treated with diet alone versus, and that's represented by kale, versus diet plus drugs, which have later been shown to be effective, if these two groups not only had different health outcomes, what they did, but have different neighborhood outcomes. So the hypothesis here is that the kale group is going to be more likely to end up in poor neighborhoods than the kale plus drug groups. Okay, so what do we find? Okay, so the blue bar is the kale group and the orange bar is kale plus drugs. And lower scores equal better neighborhoods. So descriptively, the people who were treated with the drugs and had better health status did end up in richer neighborhoods over time. Overlapping confidence intervals means stay tuned for this to be rerun in larger trials.